Thank you, and thank you for the warm welcome. My name is Jeremy, and I am an alcoholic.
Hey, Jeremy.
My sobriety date is July the 7th of 2018, and my home group is in Pittsboro, in Chatham County, which is where I live now. My family, though, is from Moore County. I always feel at home coming back to Moore County. It's where they settled when they came off the big boat a couple of hundred years ago from the Western Islands of Scotland. Probably know a lot of McLeans in this area. If you like them, they're my people. If you don't, never heard of them. They might be lowland Scots. We're kind of a nomadic people. I always feel awkward at this podium. I don't ever know whether I should lean down like this or stand back. So y'all forgive me if I go back and forth. Our family's been kind of a nomadic family. My grandmother was raised on a riverboat in the Congo River in Africa, and she came back home to college, and where she met my grandfather, McLean, and he went into the ministry, and eventually they went back to the Congo to become missionaries there. And that's where my father was born and raised, in the Congo in Africa, the Belgian Congo at that time. I tell people frequently that I'm African American, and I usually get that response. But it's on my birth certificate if you want to see it. Now they came home when my dad was 13. The Congo broke out into civil war, and my grandfather stayed behind to take care of a few things. And he was captured by a neighboring tribe, and he was tortured and beaten nearly to death. When a child came running in and said, "What are you doing to my teacher?" You see, they thought he was a spy, and that child saved his life. He came back home and went into the ministry and also became a professor at St. Andrew's College. My father, being from a long line of alcoholics, had a rebellious nature, and he decided at 17 to join the Marine Corps. And he ran off. They sent him away to Vietnam almost immediately, where he did 2 tours. And that's where he was introduced into the drug culture. But he came home disillusioned and unwelcome, like a lot of our soldiers did at that time. And for the next number of years, he spent a life roaming around the Northeast, drinking and drugging and doing what people drinking and drugging do. And it's not a fifth step, so I'll just leave it at that. But after a course of time went by, he had a spiritual experience, according to his testimony. Then one night he was praying for some type of deliverance, and he felt these bands fall off of his head. And feeling that freedom, he came back home to North Carolina. He went to St. Andrew's College, which is where he met my mother. Now, being a rebellious type, at this point he had joined the hippie movement, and so you wouldn't know it, I keep my hair short, but we have this big curly hair. If we grow it long, it turns into an afro. I guess it's our African blood. And that's how he wore his hair. And big beard, and these, blue overalls and bare feet. My mother comes from a very traditional family. You never hear them use foul language. They'd always act appropriate according to them. And they were very ceremonial people, Everything had to be just so, the fork here and the knife here. They would have made good Japanese people, It was very ceremonial. And so the two of them were really polar opposites. And so it's really bizarre how the two came together, but they fell in love. And of course, my dad's mother tried to take my dad to church with his blue overalls and his bare feet and his big afro and his big beard. And the traditional church at that time wasn't very welcoming, but he did find some brothers and sisters in the black community that were happy to take him to church, and he fit right in with them. And so he, thankfully to those folks, became excited about Jesus and started to wear these big I Love Jesus pins on his blue overalls. So you can imagine what it must have been like when my mother took him home to meet my grandfather for the first time, with his afro, his beard, his blue overalls, and his big I Love Jesus pins. Somehow they did manage to get married and start a family, though. I have two older brothers. There's me and then a younger sister. Now, by this time, my father had also joined the ministry, and so by the time I was born, he was a Methodist minister. And growing up as a pastor's child is very different. We were expected to be seen and not heard, to behave like good little boys and good little girls, which is counterintuitive for little kids to do. We want to be loud and seen, and I'm pretty and I'm smart, and if you ever have a chance to watch kids experience life for the first time, it's a really beautiful thing. But we weren't able to do that in that environment, and so I think that I made these deals with myself to do the very best I could to be a good little boy. I believe that the deals that I made with myself to be a good little boy cost me my voice, my sense of wonder, and my sense of self-worth for most of my adult life. I was very shy growing up. I was very timid. I was friendly, but I did make friends easily. And being in the Methodist church, we moved around a lot. By the time I got to high school, we had moved 9 or 10 times. So everywhere I went, I was picked on and beat up and bullied, and I just never seemed to fit in anywhere. I always felt like an outsider, like an outcast everywhere I went. Probably 13, I guess, was about the time I found my first drink, and I found it in a little liquor cabinet that my parents had, and I don't remember what it tastes like, but I do remember what it made me feel like. And I knew even back then, somehow or another, this elusive liquid is going to be trouble for me later in life. I started to get interested in girls about that time, but being a skinny, shy, outcast kind of a kid, they weren't interested in me at all. And I started to wonder if I would ever date a woman. And I was working on a farm at the time, and I had a lot of friends in the rodeo. And I had noticed that the bull riders always seemed to have girls hanging around them. And, you know, I was trying to figure out what it was that girls liked, you know, and they liked the tough guys, the guys that were fighters, you know. And I wasn't good at fighting, you know, really even defending myself at all. And I thought, well, you know, that part's not going to work out. But I saw that the bull riders had the girls, and I thought, well, I could do that, you know. And I think that's just good alcoholic thinking, being intimidated by a 150-pound man, but going to go ride a 1,500-pound animal. So we started training, you know, in the practice pens, and eventually I was riding bulls in the rodeo. And you know, like most things that I accomplished in life, I was never really satisfied with the results. The ladies did get a little more interested, I have to admit. But, you know, nothing was ever really good enough. But during that time is when I met my buddy Clark. Now, Clark was an old Australian fella, and he was a bush cowboy. So they would trap cattle in the outback of Australia. And what they would do, he would tell me stories. He had just an amazing sense of spirituality about him. he would tell me that it's perfectly spiritual to be natural, and it's perfectly natural to be spiritual. He would just take the regular things that we do during the day and make spiritual stories out of them. And I always admired that about him. He told me this story about how they trapped cattle in the outback. There'd be these salt flats out there where the wild scrub bulls would come and to lick up the ground. They'd find these salt flats, and they'd come and they'd put posts around them, fence posts. And they would leave, and because the bulls wouldn't come around for a while because it smelled like people. But eventually they got used to it, and they would come back to lick the ground. About 6 months later, they'd go back and they'd set the rails, all except for one opening. Same thing, they'd stay away a while, then eventually come back. And the bulls got used to coming in and out of this corral and licking up the ground and leaving again with impunity. And then they would set the trap. It took about 18 months to build this. And with the trap, they would take 2 pointy sticks, and they would put them into the ground facing in towards the corral. So the scrub bulls would come in to lick up the ground, and the 2 sticks would just push aside. But when they went to leave, they would poke them right in the chest. And those 2 pointy sticks held those wild bulls, wild scrub bulls, wild horses in captivity until they could come and get them. They weren't coming to get them to take them home to be pets. They were taking them home for meat. They were taking them home to their death. He told me that story, and I thought it was a really neat thing. And it would be years before I realized that that's how the disease of addiction had trapped me. A little bit at a time, let me get used to it. A little bit at a time, little freedom gone, and let me get used to it. By the time I was a senior in high school, I was working in an ice skating rink, and I was a maintenance guy there and also the Zamboni driver. If you don't know what a Zamboni is, it's that big machine that drives around the ice and makes it all smooth again. And it's a fancy-looking machine, but it's really just a boxy tractor. For a southern kid, it was really not that big of a deal. They had me running their machine. But I ended up meeting a lot of Canadian guys there when we rebuilt the rink one summer. And I wanted to learn more about it, and I didn't know anybody who knew more about that than the Canadians did. And so that summer after I graduated, I went to Canada and went to work with those guys for a while. And you always hear that Canadian folks are really nice. And when I got up there, the guy who I was staying with, his father died, and he kind of left unexpectedly, and I didn't have any place to stay. And I was 5,000 miles away from home with no phone and not very much money. But the guys at the shop, they just took me in, and I just slept on their couches. And they just moved me around, and they never really seemed to mind at all. Some of the finest hospitality I've ever known. Those Canadians really are nice folks if you ever have the chance. After that, I came back home. I started working construction, which is what I do now. And I started working in the church that I was involved in. I started working in international missions. We would go to Eastern Europe a lot. I must have gone to Eastern Europe 30 times over the next 10 years, working with the folks there. And Eastern Europe in the late 90s had just come out of communism. And the people there were stripped of really every basic human need. They had very little water or food or proper housing. They were starving to death and freezing to death. And they would sit up just to the latest hours of the night. Fellowshipping is what they called it. And I was tired, I wanted to go to sleep. I didn't want to stay up talking. There was a language barrier, and I eventually would learn the language to some degree, but I had never met a group of people that loved to be together as much as these folks did. When they were stripped of all of the things that they needed as human beings, what they fell back on was each other. And that camaraderie that they had in the midst of all of their adversity. I think the only places I've ever seen anything like that other than in Eastern Europe is in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. It made a lasting impression on me and was helpful to recognize it when I would come into the rooms later on in my life. I got married when I was 21 and she was 19. I did find a lady, and we started a life together. Now, in good Scottish fashion, you know, what we do, I told you, I learned at a very early age to internalize all my emotions because there was never really a place for that. And so in our practices in our family, we kept everything to ourselves. And if we had a problem with somebody, we just talk about them behind each other's back to somebody else. You know, the healthy way. And my wife's family wasn't like that at all. They were like very openly communicative and almost in an abusive way. Be in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner, you know, like the Italian people you see on TV or something, you know, just fighting and that's how they are. And it made me really nervous. I didn't know what was going to happen, and then they just carry on like nothing happened. So you can imagine when we got married about how that went. She would scream and I would internalize and talk bad about her to my family. That's what we did. I firmly believe my time in the rodeo kept me away from drugs and alcohol because we were hooked on what we called a natural high. I don't know what was natural about riding a 2,000-pound bull, but we called it a natural high, and that kept me away from it for a while. It wasn't our culture to use drugs and alcohol at that time. I don't know what the circuit's like now. Probably a little different. But at 21, newly married, internalizing all my feelings with a wife who was yelling and screaming at me, the drink looked like a comfortable choice, and I became immediately a daily drinker, which was very convenient, by the way, too, because I could blame all of my alcoholism on my wife. You see, I hardly drank before we got married, so it had to be her fault. Life went on for me that way for a while. You know, we would eventually have 4 children together, and we would go through what a life would be like for married folks with 4 children who have an alcoholic father. And the disease progressed as it normally does. You know, it would get worse, and I would start to hide it more and more, putting things into containers or, hiding containers, and hoping and thinking that, she hadn't figured it out or that she wouldn't know. You ladies back me up on this. She knew. They always know. They have such an intuition about whatever their men are doing. And I don't know how you ladies come by that intuition, but just so you know, we men do not have it at all. Things got worse. Things got worse, they continue to get worse. And as they would over the next 18 years, we'd go through periods of separation where we would try to do counseling and we try to do different things and eventually get back together, and that would last a while and fall apart again. And I'd say, okay, well, I'll cut back on drinking, or I'll stop drinking for a while, and without spiritual help, how that went. It always ended miserably. As we were going through all of that, and we had just gotten back together after a separation, I got a call that my brother, also an alcoholic, both my brothers are, was having trouble, and he had been admitted to the hospital, and for alcoholism. And so I went to see him there, yellow, sores all over his body. And, we just didn't talk about things in my family. We all knew that he had a drinking problem and it was pretty bad, but, it was his problem. And we figured he'd deal with it however he was supposed to deal with it. And we didn't know, nobody knew. we were all alcoholics, but nobody really knew what to do about it except keep it to yourself, you know. But this time he couldn't, and so they decided that they'd help him to get well, and they'd send him off to treatment, and that's what they did. They sent him off to a treatment center. But a day into treatment, he was too sick, and they sent him back to the hospital, where we got a call saying that his liver was shutting down from alcohol-induced hepatitis, and that there was nothing more that they could do. They brought him back home, and we were all there with the family. I was holding his hand while he breathed for the last time. Nothing in life had prepared me to watch my 38-year-old brother die from alcoholism. Internalizing my emotions like I always had. After holding my brother's hand while he died from alcohol, ironically enough, I drank the hardest I ever drank after that. Now, if that's not an admission to alcoholism, I don't know what is, because any normal person would have never picked up a drink again. A few months later, I woke up in an ambulance, and apparently I drank so much I went into convulsions on the floor, and my wife had called an ambulance to pick me up and take me to the hospital, which infuriated me because I didn't have a drinking problem at all. And I got to the hospital and refused treatment, and they sent me back home. I got home, I was locked out of the house, and but I had a liquor bottle in the garage, so that was good enough, you know. So I drank on that a while and passed out in the hammock in the yard. I thought, well, we'll forget about it this night. Well, after all of that, I started to visit the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't go because I wanted to get sober. I started to go to Alcoholics Anonymous because I wanted my family to leave me alone. I wanted everybody to quit telling me I had problems, and I figured if I sat in a few meetings, then they would get off my back. As most of you probably know, sitting in these rooms without working those steps is not very useful, except to take up your time. And for those next 18 months, I would struggle a lot. I would struggle a lot both with drink and with the steps and the concepts behind them. I thought I needed maybe some of those steps, but some of them I didn't need. And I started to cherry pick them. In the meantime, I started to develop this long list of why I wasn't like you people, you know, the people in this room, whoever you people is. I don't know who that is, but I started to develop this list, you know, and this long list of all the stories that I've heard why I wasn't an alcoholic because of this, because I had never had, you know, legal problems, or I didn't have a DUI, or had never been to treatment, or, you know, these long lists. And over the course of those next 18 months to a year, I would watch the disease of alcoholism start to work that list down. To the point where my list of I wasn't like you people was getting pretty short. And but that would happen for a while, till one day I got a call from my wife saying, "You have to come home now. Our daughter's tried to commit suicide." So I came home, and fortunately she was okay, but again, not being prepared for how to deal with something like that in a healthy way, I turned to the only way that I knew how to deal with anything in life, to internalize my feelings and to drink. I don't really know what happened next, but I ended up in a hotel room, had been drunk for a while, kind of in that place where I was holding a gun in one hand and a bottle in the other, and trying to decide which which turn it is. Thinking that I can't keep going on this way. I can't keep living in misery. I can't keep living in this jail cell in my mind. Some brothers in the program had found out about my situation, and they came and found me. Well, a classic 12-step call. You know, they could have come in that room and they could have been ugly to me and told me why I was stupid and why I was screwing up and why I was doing all these things badly. But they didn't do that. They came to me like a father who was rescuing a wounded child. They were so kind to me in that place. And they could see that I was fragile. And they helped me get out of there, and they helped me get into a treatment center. They helped me to realize how bad I needed help and helped me to find a place to find it. I remember walking into that treatment center, walking down the corridor, and I heard this small, still voice come from somewhere and said, "Jeremy, you don't have to suffer anymore." Like I needed permission. Like I needed permission to stop abusing myself, to stop trying to kill the pain with a substance. Clark and I would talk a lot about breaking horses. When we would break horses, it was really important to teach the horse obedience but not break its will. A horse without a will was not a good horse. We wanted to be able to charge that horse at any type of danger, charge it right into a wall, and at the very last minute, pull the reins just so, and have that horse trust you right up to what looked like certain death. But it was important that that horse maintained his powerful spirit. Breaking a horse was a lesson in obedience. It wasn't breaking his spirit. And for me, there down on my knees, doing my third step, that story came back to me. The higher power wasn't trying to break my spirit. He's trying to break my will. He's trying to teach me obedience. And that was what the third step was for me. I lay down my will and trust you to whatever the bitter end may look like. From the day that I left treatment to this day, I did everything. I've done everything that they have told me to do. The instructor there told me, he said, "This is very simple." He said, "All you have to do is follow the directions." And I thought, well, I know how to do that. I've never done it really that well. I've always kind of just seen directions and thought, okay, I got this. I can figure it out. I know better. I know how to do it, but I never have. So I thought, well, maybe we'll try it this way for a while and see what happens. And the 12 steps are simple, but they're not altogether easy. You see, my will continues to get in the way of my own recovery if I don't take the opportunity to lay it down every single day. In recovery, I had the opportunity to see life through a new set of eyes. The things that I complained about before were now actually gifts to me. People who were ugly to me were teachers in my life. They were teaching me how to appreciate life in a whole new way. My whole attitude and outlook upon life did change. All of the fear that I carried around my entire life, all of those voices telling me, "You're no good, you're not going to succeed, this isn't going to work out," all of those voices are still there. But in recovery, I don't have to listen to them anymore. In recovery, they don't have power over me any longer. In recovery, I don't live in fear. I live in a freedom today that I feel like I don't deserve. I feel like I deserve to be locked up somewhere. But here I am. the fellow that came and rescued me out of the hotel room, I ran into him recently, and he saw me in really just the worst state you could see a human being. He said to me, Jeremy, there is no way for you to get to that place to where you're standing right now. But yet here you are. He said, there's a way when there seems to be no way. I had cried out for years. During this time in active addiction, I had cried out to this God of my childhood, this God that I believed in. I cried out to please relieve me of this addiction. Relieve me of this plague. And it was like nothing. It was like I was standing outside and there was a guy inside with a room full of coats just laughing at me in the cold. It felt cruel. That's what it felt like. But in recovery, what I realized was happening during all of that time was the mighty acts of God to lead me to recovery. It only took 20 years. That's not too bad. Some of us are a little thick and a little stubborn. Now, I can't know what your views are about organized religion. I don't hold any fault against it. Being raised by a pastor, I got a very good education in the Bible, which I still very much appreciate. Being raised by a Marine, I got a very good discipline and work ethic, which I very, very much appreciate. I don't hold any hostage against religion. I know people have gotten hurt there. I did. But I can't think about the things that didn't work out. I have to think about the things that did. And the spiritual tools that I had to work with now have helped me in recovery to grow dramatically. I don't know what your views are about a higher power, about a God. But all of my experiences have led me to this. There is a great force that exists in this world. There is a great spirit of love. And I hope if we listen, we'll hear it telling each one of us that your life is significant in this world and that each and every one of you is beautiful. Thank you for letting me share.